The Resource Nationalism Index, published by Verisk Maplecroft, tracks how governments assert greater control over their natural resources. Now, this through higher taxes, tighter regulations, or state invention. The latest index reveals a sharp rise in resource nationalism, particularly among critical mineral producers, raising concerns about supply security and investment risks. Now, the shift comes as global trade tensions intensify, with the US imposing fresh tariffs on key partners, further complicating access to essential raw materials and minerals. To break down these findings and the implications, Jimena Blanco, a chief analyst at Verisk Maplecroft, joins me now. Jimena, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this index shows that 47 developing countries, including 17 major critical mineral producers, have seen a significant increase in resource nationalism over the last 5 years. We'll get to the other side of the spectrum in a moment, but what are the primary drivers behind this trend?
Well, unlike in previous cycles where we tend to associate resource nationalism with rises in commodity prices, this has a lot to do with geopolitical tensions and debates about the role that critical minerals will play in the future of our economies, right? Whether we're talking about tech, defense, renewables, EVs, critical minerals have a major role to play. So producing nations are in a way playing a balancing act in many forms, not playing to either the West or to the demands of its rivals, but trying to make or take the greater benefits in economic diversification for their own countries. And so this is driving new forms of resource nationalism, not the ones we have, historically been used to.
And I want to talk about that because there seems to be some sort of a transition between what we see historically and how it's manifesting itself right now in terms of this protectionism or nationalism. Talk to me about how this is evolving.
So I tend to use the comparison between the axe and the scalpel, right? Historically, we tended to see interventionist governments go for big moves, nationalizations, expropriations, forced divestment, asset seizures. Now, the forms of intervention and protectionism we're seeing now are a lot more nuanced. They relate to tax hikes, to changes in contracts, to local content requirements, to the need to process or add value to extraction locally. And so it's not one size fits all in terms of how governments are reacting, but it's really talking about the fact that producing governments are seeing a potential in the shifts in the economy that we expect to come from these new technologies. And so they are trying to maximize how they can use that to the benefit of their own populations and their own standing in the global arena.
What critical minerals are most at risk, Jimena?
Well, we've seen different shifts, right? So whether we're talking, for example, if we take the example of lithium, right, which is highly concentrated in terms of where it's produced, roughly a quarter of lithium production comes from Chile. Now, the fact that this is concentrated in a few producing jurisdictions and that the Chilean government roughly 2 years ago decided to make a strategic move and declare lithium of national interest, and that production would necessarily include state participation, that of course, has major implications for that particular sector. But even when we're thinking about, say, copper, we also see the amount of copper produced in resource or in countries that have seen an uptick in resource nationalism also increase. So now we're seeing that roughly a third of global copper production is happening in jurisdictions that have experienced a significant increase in risk. And that, of course, includes, Chile, which I already mentioned, but it also includes other major producers like, say, Peru, where, again, the debate is around how does the mining industry play a role in economic development and diversification.
And, of course, all eyes are on, the relationships of certain countries or economies with major powers like the US and China. How are emerging markets leveraging their resource endowments to sort of navigate that relationship?
Well, of course, we're seeing many of these jurisdictions enter either, agreements or partnerships or direct relationships with demand centers. That could be the US, Canada, the EU, Australia, etc. But we're also seeing the demand centers pursuing these relationships. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that these producing countries also have strong relationships with the rivals of the nations I just mentioned. So, they're not picking sides. What they're trying to do is to make the most of the opportunities that are arising from the rivalries between the West and China or Russia, and try to make the most of it in terms of attracting investment and adding value with players from both sides of the competition.
How do you see this one? I mean, the US administration has expressed intentions to build metals refining facilities on Pentagon military bases. I mean, this is to boost domestic production of critical minerals. How might such initiatives affect global dynamics in the critical minerals space?
Well, I think the example you're using is very interesting because, again, as I mentioned, we're seeing new forms of interventionism and protectionism. And this would play into another broader trend that we've seen, which is how the West is looking to secure its critical supply chains. So we're seeing a lot of more refined or more creative ways of establishing processing, even recycling, for example, with the European Union looking to recycle more domestically. On the one hand, we can see that that's clearly an environmental policy, but on the other hand, it has the added benefit of keeping minerals in their own economy and maintaining those for industrial production of other natures.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Well, thanks very much indeed for your insights. Jimena Blanco is the chief analyst at Verisk Maplecroft, and that was her talking to me about that. Thank you very much indeed, Jimena.
Thank you.